Hello and welcome to Women's Rugby League podcast. I'm joined today by
Julia Lee.
So Julia, tell us a bit about women in rugby league.
Women in Rugby League, the project itself.
Yeah.
Well, it started actually probably in 2017 when I was invited to an International Women's Day event and I was asked to guest speak, and I went to Heritage Quay where all the history of the sport is kept, and they said, well, we're going to have a big day to celebrate Women's Rugby League. And I came along with my box of stuff from my refereeing days, and they had nothing. In the whole archive of Rugby League at Heritage Quay, they had nothing on women in rugby league or women who play rugby league whatsoever. So at that point, I thought, this needs to change desperately. People need to know about the women who've played rugby league over the last century, but also they need to know about the pioneers and the people that have brought the sport forward. So that's where it started. So this is all Women in Rugby League is a website now, and it started off initially in Batley, in Castleford, Hull, and also Featherstone, where I got a Heritage Lottery project, and we just started collecting any woman in those areas involvement in rugby league. It's now moved to specifically, we've just got another Heritage Lottery grant, and actually looking at women who play or participate, who coach, anyone who's involved in the women's game, which is really important to us, and really just beginning to home down onto it, because basically there's no records whatsoever about when the league started in 1985, about the tours from 96, although there was a tour in 1991. Did you know that?
No, that's the thing. You say like there's no history on it. I like I was saying to you off air, I'll go to do research on stuff, and no, it just doesn't exist.
No. And actually, what is there is incorrect in a lot of ways. On Wikipedia, and we've got this great guy in Australia actually called John Moriarty. Hopefully, John's listening to this, who is like the Wikipedia king. And he's been contacting me for ages because he wants to get Wikipedia correct. So every time I get some validated evidence of what the score was or anything, and he goes off and he corrects it all. So he's great. And fancy him, Moriarty, a name Moriarty, and he's uncovering all the women and girls international results.
No, that's fantastic, because the sport wouldn't be where it is without everyone who's gone out and done what they've done over the years.
No, not at all. And that was part of it as well, because so many people were telling me that Women's Rugby League started in 2017. And it was like, no, it didn't. You know, I think it was 84 when the first three teams, 1984 when the first three teams formed, and then a league by 1985. And these pioneering teams were actually being told by their MPs, you shouldn't be playing.
Yeah.
What are you doing playing rugby league? They were being stopped from playing. They weren't given official referees. There was no governing body as such, because BARLA at the time, British Amateur Rugby League, and the RFL didn't want to know. They didn't know where to put these teams that wanted to play, because it was so unusual.
They'll have both been scared to put their hands up and take responsibility for it in case anything went wrong.
Absolutely. That's exactly as it was. So WALA was formed, Women's Amateur Rugby League Association, by a guy called David Clayton in Guiseley and Rod Lacey in Dudley Hill, who's, I think it was his wife at the time, who wanted to play. Was it daughter? No, his daughter wanted to play. So they set up the league and then got other women involved, and then it began to grow in the 1980s. I think at one point there was about 30 teams playing in the late 1980s. One being Fulham, who I set up in London.
They got another massive name from yesteryear that's been rebranded, repackaged, and now. Do they have a women's team there, or is it? I know there's like London Chargers, and there's a few other little teams setting up now.
Well, they did, because I went. So from my refereeing days, I was told that unless you've played, you can't referee. So I moved to London when I was 18 for work, and I thought, well, I've got to play then.
Yeah.
So I advertised in Time Out magazine in London, got all these southern women, a few northern women actually were exiles in London. And we formed it. At the time, Bev Risman was the coach at Fulham.
Wow.
And they played at Chiswick. And he was just a big supporter of developing the sport. So I said to him, well, can we use Chiswick, where Fulham played as out home ground? Yeah, no problem. He gave us a couple of players to coaches, but that's a whole other story. They'd never coached in their lives. And then we used to travel up and down the motorway playing the northern teams. So the Halifax, we played Wigan, Widnes. We used to just go up and down. We got absolutely stuffed because I always remember because the coaches that he gave us set moves. So these women had never seen a game of rugby league. And they was giving us set moves, but we couldn't pass it, we couldn't kick it. We didn't know how to catch, and these women hadn't even seen a play the ball. So our first game was against Halifax at home. We did a curtain raiser, as it was called, before the Fulham game. And I remember Halifax, Lisa McIntosh, she was just running through us like a train, just smashing us. And I remember our first time, Miriam, who was our kicker, kicked the ball upfield. And we all just stood there and clapped because we managed to do something. We just didn't know how to teach. And then we got a great guy called Reg Pearce who began to coach us, and we did get a bit. I think we did win some fixtures, but not many at all. But they were great days, and I'm still in touch with some of those women now. But how many people know that there was a team in Fulham in the late 1980s and 90s?
So was that your intention playing? My vision is I want to be a referee.
Yeah, well, that's where it started. So when I was 17, I saw the advert in the programme, and it's not that I wanted to be a referee. They wouldn't let me play at the time. There was no teams. And I just wanted to be involved in the sport, and it was a dare, to be honest. And it was a bit of an accident. I applied. So I applied and then got this letter, dear sir, you're very welcome. And it's like, suddenly I'd got thrown into this world that I wasn't quite sure what I was only 17, 18. But I thought, I'm going to give it a go. And then before long, the whole Daily Mail was involved, and my mother said, you can't give this up now, you've had all this publicity. You're not embarrassing me by not carrying on with it.
You may have thought you were doing this for a short while. You're stuck with it now.
You're stuck with it for life, yeah. So once the society had accepted me in, it was like, well, and then I moved to London quite quickly. So I only did 2 junior games, 2 under-11s, and then I moved to London, which only had open age. So I moved and they didn't tool you up then, so there was no refereeing courses. There was a bit of a laws of the game exam. They just threw you the laws of the game book and said, off you go. So when I got to London, it was just like a baptism of fire. I was refereeing these big airy blokes from Australia, from New Zealand, expats, ex-northerners, all who just wanted to fight, really.
Yep.
So I had to learn my trade pretty quick.
It's good that the opportunities were actually given to people who asked. Because people forget, like, someone, we need more referees. Like, put your hand up.
Yeah.
Now it's a proper thing. So you went there, obviously, a young woman, refereeing men. How long did it take before people started, like, you had obviously publicity from whole Daily Mail? Did you get much publicity when you were down there?
Yeah, quite well. I became, again, because I've been told, and my passion for the sport, so it was in my blood. So when I went down to London, I saw that they needed help and support. It was really small. It was a fledgling sport. It'd been there since the 60s, but it still wasn't, they only had open age. So I became the PRO for my sins. I also started coaching in the estates, in all the schools, and things like that. I remember one area, this guy, they just gave me a bag of balls, this development officer, and I went on to an estate in, I think it was North London, with about 12 balls, and 100 kids approached me to go coach them. I only just passed me coaching, but then that's another story. So yes, I began to get, because I was doing open age, and they remind me now, actually, my first brawl in London, I cried after I came off crying. I didn't stop the game, I did the whole game. But they were just fighting in lumps.
You managed to keep it professional on the pitch and after just go, oh, wow.
Yeah, and as I was going off, I was like, what did I do wrong? Because no one was there. You didn't have such judges. There was no one there. I mean, you were going 2 hours on average to go and referee, so there was no assessors or anyone to look after you. But I used to dread it because I hadn't been really equipped, and that later on, when I worked for the Rugby Football League, or as a volunteer as well, I brought in referee training and all those sort of things, because you need to be able to taught how to do it in order to be accomplished, don't you? And despite the referee society being lovely and the people there, they were all on just they want enough referees to go around. So it sort of grew from there. I think I got a lovely Legs Lee article. I was in Hemel Hempstead's clubhouse as well with all the players, a picture, because I was in Best magazine of Woman of the Week at one point, I think, and they were there. They took a picture with me and Hemel Hempstead, and at one point I was in their clubhouse, I think. So it gradually grew, I suppose. When I went to Australia, which I went in 1988, and again just went out. I went out to see the Lions touring. At the time, the Great Britain Lions. It's when we won one Test match and that great Des Drummond wiggle. Yeah. So I just went out to watch, but I ended up staying for a year and refereeing. So went into Manly, as you do. That's why I was the first woman in Australia as well, because I just happened to turn up, got me refereeing ticket. I found the other day in my archives I got a coaching badge, but I don't remember doing that. So whenever I did everything, because they kept saying to me I wasn't good enough because I was a woman and I had to prove myself, I just did everything I could to be the best that I could be. So I became a coach, got past 100% the referees, the laws, anything I did, fitness-wise, all those sort of things. And in Australia, because I'd had quite a song and dance when I was here in the UK as a referee, but I got 3 lines. Yeah. Seen the Pommy Whistler.
Oh, that is brilliant.
Yeah. It changed when I went to because they didn't mind me refereeing kids, but when I went back 10 years later, it was a bit different, to be honest. When I was refereeing open age, they weren't as accommodating. But yeah, when I first started, and it was great actually, Australia, because I learned how to referee.
Yeah.
So they had a really good system. I brought a lot back actually from there. So they used to have nights where they taught you how to. So it's not just the laws of the game; it's how to interpret them and how to blow your whistle and where do you stand and how do you do the signals and a whole host of things with officiating.
The things you probably should have had given to you right at the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're already established and now you're getting trained.
Yeah. Well, and it was good because it gave me confidence when I came back, and that's when I started taking it seriously, taking the fitness test, started doing conference, and then moving into the professional game. When Fred Lindop, the great Fred Lindop, was the controller of referees.
Oh, wow. So, yeah, that's achievement just there, let alone the rest. Like, for me, can you imagine the amount of press you'd have got now? When there's a massive... What,
being a first, do you think? Oh.
If say this was now and the first female was refereeing, because the game's always had a following, but it's always been a friend of a friend or family. Now there's people who are just genuine fans.
Yeah.
It's like you were doing that and getting articles written about you and stuff like that in a time when there was nothing. Like, you could have a women's Great Britain team and no one would have blinked.
Well, that's exactly what they did. Didn't they?
They kept hitting and going, "Oh, you don't want to watch that. You don't want to watch that. Watch."
Yeah.
So yeah, can you imagine now, like how big? But people forget, like, you've had to do stuff like that, then learn what you needed to learn to give to people afterwards.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's what I see now, and I guess this project is all from that, really, with the women in Rugby League, and particularly the Life with because we're calling it Life with the Lionesses.
Nice.
Because there's a whole host of games that nobody knows. These women that basically sacrifice their lives, really, to play the sport they loved. So they were training 3 times a week. They were meeting and training. So they were travelling and training on some occasions 3 times a week altogether. They had to raise, the first tour was 50 grand. in 1996. The French was a bit different. I haven't got
50 grand in 1996.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
50 grand now's a massive chunk of money. So 50 grand then when there was probably little to no sponsors, zero coverage on anything whatsoever.
They were bucket collecting outside grounds.
Yeah.
They were doing race nights. They were doing all sorts to get that money. And that's what we're uncovering. We're getting the stories. So we're going to interview 50 women, at least 50. I'll interview as many as I can and do some podcasts and things around it as well for them to tell their stories. So the team manager on the Women in Rugby League website at the moment, the team manager, Nikki Carter, of that first tour, and she talks about they had to strap, there was no bank accounts then. So they had to strap the money to her wrist as she walked around Australia with this 50 grand in a suitcase.
Proper sinister. Yeah. Oh, wow. Yeah, because obviously now sports teams, they have proper bank accounts for things like this now.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was all new then.
Yeah, probably like... You'd have struggled to get one as a normal men's team.
Yeah. Well, eventually they became associate members of WALA, all these acronyms. But they had a Great Britain committee under WALA, the great woman Jackie Sheldon, who this will uncover who. A lot of people say Jackie who, unless they're aware of the time. So what's driven this as well is she's got a whole attic worth of stuff right from 1985, but also about the tour because she was an assistant coach on 1996. And then she was the head coach in 1998, 2000, 2002 and 2003. And she's kept everything. And it's just brilliant. You go into her attic and it's like a treasure trove of things. And all the stats, facts. And she was also the Women and Girls Rugby League Development Officer. She was the first one. And she was in the spot probably as in working or involved at that level for 10 years. And then in 2003 she left and people have forgotten about her. And she was a pioneer of this sport. Yeah. She brought in girls' festivals. She brought in development plans to help develop the sport. She single-handedly really took those 5 tours on and got them out with volunteers, but she drove it. She didn't just coach, she helped get all the money.
Yeah, she did everything backstage as well.
Publicity, she was getting the communication, the publicity, you name it, she was doing it. How she did it in the time, I think she exhausted herself by 2003, to be honest. But it's women like that I want to tell the game about. Without them, the game wouldn't be where it is. And there's so many more pioneers and the women that played that nobody knows anything about.
I love it, man. I want to. You know me. I want to hear everything. I know all the things that have gone on to get. So we've got. You've got them. You've got a podcast coming up, which is fantastic, and we'll get that posted out on here and all our socials. So you've got a bit of a tour going on at the moment, as well. You want to tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, you mean as when we're all our exhibitions and things like that? Well, that's the plan. So at the moment, we're collecting all this memorabilia. We're collecting women's stories and women's memories, really. And we've got a lot of volunteers at Heritage Key at the moment that are making sense of all that and collecting all the stats and facts and things. And the intention is our first one's going to be in York, actually, in June 18th, 19th, but we're getting a touring exhibition. So what we intend to do is tour all this, particularly linked to the Rugby League World Cup. So we've got 10 areas that we initially targeted that I know where the pioneering teams were because I'm that old and I was around at the time. So there's areas like Wigan, Warrington, although Widnes have just been in touch and they're going to have it, Castleford, Featherstone, Wakefield, Hull, Huddersfield. Obviously you can't not go in the birthplace of Rugby League. Yeah, York, Leeds. So we sort of identified in the Heritage Lottery bid, but we will go anywhere, to be honest, because it's important that we... and also, we'll be going in the Houses of Parliament. Get in there. We don't know when yet, but we've got the sort of green light that the MPs want us there, so we've just got to make that happen. But we're going to tell the story of these women. And then what I want to do is those women that were part of the Lionesses and the Pioneers, I want them to head it all up. It's not this is about them and getting their voices out from their local areas. The Jane Banks of Warrington, the Lisa McIntosh of Halifax, the Brenda Dobeck of Wakefield, who I think is the most capped player, but we'll prove that through this project. But also coached a team for 8 years that I think was only beaten once. How amazing is that?
Yeah, like treble winning, literally winning everything.
Won everything. And interestingly, when my play, I've had a play written about me, and when it toured in 2018, one of the actors who was from Castleford said to me, "My auntie played a bit." And I went, "Oh, was she?" And he went, "Brenda Dover." I went, "Your auntie didn't play a bit. She was one of the most brilliant players ever. You know, one of the most talented players ever. Nobody could stop her. Absolutely amazing athlete. And I think she played till she was 36, but also she was a coach in 2007-8. So she coached England for a few years as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like having that time and go to as many of them as I can do, because they're all in areas, but I travel to anyway. But no, that's fantastic. Take it, not just like, here's what, taking it to people, have a look at this. Did you know? Like, you're going, but someone whose auntie was Brenda Dobeck, she used to play a bit.
I know. Well, it should be taken to the people, isn't it?
Yeah, it should.
Because this is people's history. This is the people's history, and this is how you uncover other history. And people just don't know about it. So the intention of this was to take it to the people and have it in local clubhouses, not particularly museums and things like that. Although if that comes up, that's brilliant. But actually taking it to the locality. We're also going to run some podcast workshops so young people can interview these lionesses as well. So that's an intention. We've got the exhibition and we've got the film Power Mary that we're sort of taking around with us as well. Joanna Lester, who produced Power Mary, which is a story of the Papua New Guinea women and their build-up for going into the Rugby League World Cup. It's a documentary. Also, we filmed Ref, the play, which is the play that's written about my story. So we've got that to show as well if anyone else is interested. So if anyone knows that's particularly listening to this about someone that sort of wants to host this, wants to be involved in this, then, you know, everything's on at the minute for us to be able to do it. And we're just looking for places to take it on, really, and just engage. I want people to engage with it and put stuff around it to make it a real celebration of women in rugby league.
And what a year to do it! And you've got a World Cup here. You're going to have the most covered the game's ever going to be this year, and that's just with what's scheduled so far. Let alone the stuff that's going to come out through the season and stuff like that. So you're going to be like, here's your history. You've seen that on television. Here are the people who helped set this up. Oh, and by the way, we're down the road from you. You want to come and have a look?
Brilliant.
You know, what a time to be doing it in, because it is literally the boom time for women's rugby this year.
Yeah, it is. It's a great time, isn't it? And I know internationally it's growing. So internationally we've uncovered some really great history already. So I chair the Women and Girls Advisory Group internationally. So we've written a strategy for the women's game and how we're going to grow the sport. But because of that, it's put me in a real privileged position. So I'm in touch with, last year in September, it was 100 years before the first ever Women's Rugby League game in Australia in 1921. And it was done by accident because they accidentally signed off that this game could be played. And before they knew it, Dally Messenger had volunteered to kick the ball off of the first ever Women's Rugby League game in Sydney, it was, before 30,000 people.
Wow. Yeah.
That was the first Women's Rugby League game. And then it had a couple of years' worth and they were getting big crowds, a bit like women's football. And then in the 1950s, Dr. Victoria Dawson's uncovered some games in the 1950s that took place in Cumbria, out and about and around. Papua New Guinea had some games in 1970s that nobody knows about. So what I'm hoping with this as well, it opens up the history globally of women that attempted to play but then get held back.
You're getting people thinking, and people, oh yeah, actually, yeah, there was, I'm sure there was some matches. And then before you realise it, oh yeah, actually it's being played continuously. It's just been forgotten.
Yeah, Yeah, that's the whole thing. If you don't tell the stories, if you don't have it documented, which is what this project will do, people don't know about it. And that's the beauty that I keep uncovering things. As I said to you off air, that, you know, I knew there was something in 1991. I had an inkling, but not quite sure that there was. But they played France, so there was a women's team that played France that represented the country. I need to find out a lot more about it. So I think there's one woman from Halifax has contacted me, and there's a couple in Warrington that played in that game.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So we need to uncover that and find out more about that and tell everyone, tell the world about it.
That's it. And you go like, I've had an inkling, and all of a sudden, oh yeah, I was there.
Yeah,
I remember that. I was on that. I was on. Yeah. No, that's amazing. So like, your website's up and running. You're doing really well with social medias as well.
Yeah,
So,
we're doing really well with that.
On Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, search Women in Rugby League. That's where you'll find these guys, because you've got a lot planned, you've got a lot going on. You're basically keeping the eyes on the game in downtime. We'll kick off of Women's Challenge Cup this weekend, which had fantastic viewing figures and, you know, more coverage than ever. And then we've got, oh yeah, now look at this is what's happened previously.
Yeah.
So how many years did you referee for in total?
About 16 years I actually refereed. Yeah, I got injured in 1998 and I gave it away eventually in 2001. So a player ran into me and really damaged my back badly. And I just couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't do multi-directional. But as it was meant to be, because I then started in administration. And then that was a whole different ball game, as they say so often in rugby league. That I just immersed myself in the development of the sport, and 20 years I was working, 22 years in sports development, in rugby league sports development, which, you know, what a joy to be in a sport that you love, helping develop it throughout the UK. Yeah,
so you can't really have asked. Obviously, like you said, it's a positive. I got injured. It turned out, you know, probably, yeah, because it took me in a different direction, and then, yeah, it's amazing because obviously, like, you got Tara Jones, you got Caitlin Beavers, who are getting recognition from the being officials and match officials and refereeing.
It's great to see.
I've been at matches when they're refereed and there's no difference. If anything, they get a bit more respect.
Yeah. It's lovely to see, isn't it?
Yeah, it honestly is, because it's like, I see someone like, have a woman, and I put back, yeah, but I'd less likely swear in front of a woman while playing than a male referee. So it's actually probably getting more better behaved players now. But yeah, you've got all that coming up. Who else are you trying to uncover? Is there any particular years you're looking for?
Well, this particular project's 1991 now. So it's all about the internationals up to 2003 for sure. And then there was a bit of a gap. We think there was a few games between 2003 to 2008 that are not recorded. But the RFL have things from 2008, of which we still need to... Yeah. One of the things around this is these women have never been capped. They've never been recognised for playing for the country. So in November, we'll have a big event for these women, and they'll all get the caps. So we need to make sure everything's right, everything's correct. So if anyone out there is listening has got stats, facts, things that we can match and make sure authenticate what we're doing, that's brilliant. Although we have got quite a lot of information. The other thing is we've not got a Hall of Fame for women. So the other thing that this project... I
tried to set one up and it was like opening a can of worms.
Oh yes, 20 years on.
Yeah, I tried to do one, and it was literally, I tried to do it not off my opinion. I just let people vote for who they wanted, and I had to bin it. I was like, oh my, I can't handle this. I'm not worthy to make this judgment. But having a Women's Hall of Fame is an absolute must.
Absolutely, and it's something that I keep telling people, it's an itch I've had to scratch for quite a long time. So we've got a committee set up. We've got criteria that's been recognised by the RFL and Rugby League Cares, and it'll run us alongside the men's.
Yeah.
So it's different. We don't just want to recognise players. We want to recognise the pioneers in the sport as well, and clubs. Initially, we'll start small and then it'll grow. But the start of that will be this year from this project that it'll all sort of uncover, and it's just what the sports needed, you say. And I'm so pleased you're ecstatic about, because to me, I get goosebumps thinking about it. I get goosebumps about these women are finally going to be recognised, you know, that the women that, you know, were the first internationals, finally. And you speak to the women, and it was the best time in their lives.
Yeah, you know what? When you're young and you're doing stuff with your mates and you're enjoying what you're doing, it goes so fast.
Yeah, yeah.
And they have a chance to look back on it and everyone's go, oh, do you remember we played X and you did? Oh, yeah, that's amazing. I've been running for 2021 season, 2019 season. I set up a women's awards ceremony, women's awards for the season, just because there wasn't one.
Yeah.
So you get to end the season. Well done, see you later, ladies. You've now got a woman of steel, but that's it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, to be fair, I was going to try and do the stats on top try scorer this season, but after one weekend and not being able to find match reports, that's gone out the window. Because I spent 2 days trying to find out who scored what this weekend, and I 100% hand on heart don't think I got it right.
Oh dear.
But
that's not good, is it? That's not good.
No, because you got a project going on like this and say now should be easy to document, everything's online. It's hard.
Yeah. That's another piece to do, isn't it? Because I'm not sure with this. I mean, what I'd love to do, the next stage of this is going right back to the pioneers who played and finding out local clubs, who's there, you know, that set up the league initially, the Guisleys, the Halifaxes, the Dudley Hills, and trying to find out who the try scorers were and things. But I think that's going to be a too difficult task. It's just not recorded, and if it is recorded, you know, we don't know if it's right, and unless I find some little gems that. So there's a woman in Halifax that's contacted me that's kept everything on Halifax women. We need more people like her.
A proper super fan of that club going, no, look at this.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you imagine that, just being able to have a record like this person we celebrated here is also the equivalent of this person from the modern time now, because they actually outscored that person.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure if we could get, particularly, I mean, Wakefield Panthers were winning 80-90-0. So you can imagine the tries that they ran up, the scorers that they ran up. So if we could, you know, get all of that, that would be fascinating in stats, wouldn't it? But it's a bit like now, you know, how there's sort of, at least there's probably 4 really great clubs now that, you know, will be competitive. Then it was just Wakefield Panthers and Dudley Hill. You could throw into the mix that would win everything.
Yeah, there were literally a handful, and pretty much the England squad were condensed over 3 teams.
Yeah.
And they go now they complain now the England team is spread out between 4, and it's like, used to be 3. Great Britain used to be 3 teams. Majority of them was all from Wakefield Panthers.
Absolutely, yeah. And if they started off not from Wakefield, they then moved to Wakefield.
Well, that's about it for this episode. Let's tell people where they can find you online.
Just type in Women in Rugby League and you will find us on our website, which is a .org website, but you'll find us on all social media. We're on LinkedIn, we're on Twitter, we're on Instagram, and we're on Facebook. Just type in Women in Rugby League and you will find us.
That's it. So all the information we talked about, you'll see it on there, and they've got good content. So please check it out. Thank you for coming on. We'll get you back on in the near future. And I hope you've all enjoyed this as much as I have.